Hello and welcome. This is Lita Downs from the Center for Faculty Excellence, and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, The Prospectus as the First Step to Success. Our presenters, Dr. Beate Baltes, Dr. Laura Ciaia, and Dr. Pat Thurmond, originally presented this information at the Walden 2019 National Faculty Meeting in National Harbor, Maryland. We're very glad to have them on the line today. And at this point, I'm going to turn things over to them.
Thank you, Lita. And thank you for taking the time today to review this webinar. We really appreciate it and know that your time is valuable. As noted, this is somewhat of a repeat of what we presented at the National Faculty Meeting. So if you were there, this may look familiar, but not completely familiar. As we did some interactive activities there, we had to tweak this presentation to suit this format. Now, I'd like to briefly go over the agenda for today. As you know, our overall focus is the prospectus. All of the presenters today are part of the PD designee review team in some capacity. This means we see just about all the prospecti that come through the College of Education. Our experience has taught us that this stage is critical in ensuring that students are on the right path toward building their dissertation. If they do not get this right in terms of laying a solid foundation, it generally just becomes harder to put it all together later, and the reason why this stage is so vital to their success. We've also learned that at this stage, there are two problems that are the most common. One, students generally struggle with the problem statement, and this is the first step in any prospectus, so it is vital that it is a singular, well thought out step. And the other common problem that we often see is alignment, putting the critical elements together. For this reason, this presentation will focus on these two problem areas, and we will try to provide some tips, especially related to using the design alignment tool. While we know that there's much more that is involved in the prospectus, these are the two common ones that we can cover today. So, next slide, please. As I said, it really is about laying a solid foundation. And while the problem is the first step or brick in that foundation, there are others too that include the problem, of course, the purpose, research question, framework, design, and analysis. All of these are the main elements of any prospecti. For those of you who are familiar with David Crathwell's research books, you might remember that he talks about a chain of reasoning. This is really what he's talking about, is that the research elements need to link together, ensuring that each link has a connection to the preceding link and the subsequent link. And these are in essence the links for prospecti. And so these all need to come together, hang together, and if one is missing or misaligned, the whole chain can kind of fall apart. So that's another reason why it's so critical, this stage of their education. Next slide. Knowing then that the problem statement is the first link, and often one of the greatest challenges for students, let's look at it and what exactly it is. Cush does a great job of defining it in a very no-nonsense kind of way. He defines it as a concise description of an issue to be addressed or a condition to be improved upon. It identifies the gap between the current state and a desired state. And that means the student needs to identify something that needs to change. There's a current situation and an ideal situation, and the problem is that gap. For dissertations, this may be a gap in the literature, and for those of you in the College of Education, this may be a gap in practice that we talk about there. In the end, though, the student needs to identify this one singular gap and then elaborate on the path he or she will take to fill that gap. One way to ensure that the student can identify a singular gap is by having a signal sentence or the problem is statement to help ensure the problem is narrow enough to tackle. Often students take on too many problems, and this too can cause then alignment issues. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and how the DAT can help with that too. Next slide. And we all know that the problem statement section needs more than one singular problem sentence. It also needs to provide some context for the external reader. And students often forget this, that they're actually writing for the external reader who might be pulling this off of ProQuest or down the road. They oftentimes write for themselves or their chair, who might have a lot of additional context about the problem, but that external reader does not. So this context should signal the participant group as well as the study area, whether it's national, local, statewide. This information helps to reinforce not only the scope of the problem, but the direction of the study as well for the external reader. Similarly, the student needs to provide evidence the problem exists. This is vital. And not just that it exists, but that it exists within the study area and is current and relevant. The best way to do this is through longitudinal data, of course. For example, if a student wants to show student scores have decreased, and this longitudinal data is a great way to do this, and it provides that context for the data, but it can also be reports, archival data, personal communication is also accessible, although I would say that's not always the strongest form of evidence, but there has to be some current relevant evidence to support that the problem exists within that study area. Keeping the external reader in mind too, the student should think about what questions might they have as they try to fully understand the problem that will be addressed when they read this section. For example, an external reader will ask, why is this an important problem and what are the consequences if not addressed? As we all know, not every problem is a good problem or a scholarly problem. A problem may not be feasible to really research because it's too narrow or too broad, or just not feasible in terms of access to the participant group. Or the problem maybe is just not important to anybody past the student or a small group of people. So they have to show too that this is important or relevant to someone besides themselves and to the study site. So the problem section statement section should also transition to the purpose statement section, creating this connection then that the problem statement then links to the purpose statement too, going back to Krathwohl's idea of a chain of reasoning. Next slide. Now, as we mentioned, sometimes it is a challenge for students to find that singular problem. There's a tendency to want to pull all in the kitchen sink into it, and this not only can mask then what might be a good problem in there somewhere, but causes alignment issues. And in our presentation during the National Faculty Meeting, we asked participants to review a problem section submitted by a recent Walden student. We wanted to use a real-life example, and we asked participants to identify the problem or problems within that section. So right now, what I'd like to ask you as the viewer is to pause on the next slide and take some time to read that student problem section and identify then what are the problem or problems that you see in this. So just take a minute and we'll move on, but pause your video and read this. And Beate will pick up after this.
Thank you, Laura. So as Laura just mentioned, this is a real life example, and it is a very typical first draft of a problem statement where a student wants to save the world, which of course we admire, by addressing several potential problems. On this slide now you can see we highlighted the different problem statements that were mentioned and we numbered them. So the first problem is that teachers do not have the skills to implement learner-centered teaching methods. This is stated again when you look at the middle of the slide on this page, mixed somewhere in between other problem statements. Look for the blue number 1 in parentheses. And of course there's the assumption that this is not desirable. The second problem is that teacher-centered strategies are predominantly used. So now it's no longer the novice teacher's lack of skills, but their willingness not to use it. Then we're coming to a third problem, that teachers believe one thing, but do the other thing. And in this example, the student comes back to it at the end of the problem statement with perception not being accurate. So look for the blue 3 and you can find it. Then we move away from the novice teacher's skills, but to their knowledge. So that is problem statement number 4. The fifth problem are the characteristics of the pre-service experiences that these teachers had, implying that there is a problem with the pre-service experience. And last but not least, problem statement number 6 is that the use of student-centered strategies decreases from primary to high school. Now, if a faculty member reviews this, it's difficult to help the student focus the study because it is not really clear where the student wants to go with this. Is it a problem with the teacher training that these teachers went through? Is it a lack of skills? Is it a lack of willingness? So what would really help the reviewer is if there would be a signal sentence. And the signal sentence would clearly state the problem to be investigated by this study, then at least if I review that problem statement, I know where to start to help the student narrow the topic. So in this example that we showed you, again, very real life, it's just not obvious. As a reviewer, we wouldn't even know where to get started. Next slide, please. So other issues that we see with problem statements is that students pick keywords from the literature and they just use them, such as, in this example here, determining and understanding. And the novice student or the novice researcher just doesn't realize that these are two different studies, one quantitative and one qualitative study. Sometimes the problem, purpose, and the research questions are interchanged or somewhat mixed together. Often our students are really passionate about a program at their workplace and believe that this particular program is a solution to whatever problem the school or organization faces. So what we see a lot is that the problem statement already has the answer built in. Then, of course, some students list societal problems such as illiteracy, homelessness, and they want to find a solution for that within their study. And as much as it is admirable, it's not a feasible project for a novice researcher. Often that students come up with a research plan, something that might have never been done before because there is no easy solution. And again, we need to, or the committee needs to discuss with the student if this is feasible at that time of their career as a novice researcher. Some of the if it has never been done by even a research team, the question remains if it's doable by a single novice researcher. Showing that colleagues, supervisors, or even entire organizations like schools are inept is something that is often very close to our students' hearts, but can generally not been done. And if the situation or the setting is unique, then the reader could even figure out which organization or which person is supposedly inept. So again, the feasibility of this is not given. And lastly, we see lots of problem statements that either have no evidence at all or they have evidence that doesn't align with the problem. So these are, again, the most common issues, and we list them here because it is something to look out for. And the alignment between problem and problem evidence is very common, and part of this presentation is to show you a tool that we use to avoid these issues. So the next page, please. So there is a design alignment tool, and there are various variations of the design alignment tool. Different programs use different tools, and we're going to show you an example again. Please stop the video and look at the design alignment tool, and what you should be looking for is evidence of misalignment. Next slide, please. So now where you're back to the recording, we would like to show you how we work with this design alignment tool. So if you look at the left column, the study problem and the purpose, the biggest challenge for students to complete this column is that it has to be one sentence each, or it can only be one sentence each. So now the whole kitchen sink approach that Laura demonstrated earlier is no longer possible. Again, this is a very typical design alignment tool, and we use color highlighting since it seems to work well for students. And so usually we highlight the misalignment and then we add comments through track changes with suggestions of how to correct the misalignment if that is possible. So here in our example, it is really great that the student uses signal sentences. The problem to be investigated, the purpose of the study, that's already really, really good. And when a design alignment tool has been approved by the entire committee as well as the program research director, I highly recommend that students print that tool and consider it written in stone, because then the problem statement sentence or the purpose statement sentence should never change in their prospectus or proposal or final study. It should always be exactly word for word the same. So in the first column, if we look at it again, we are highlighting the pieces that contradict each other. The problem is that teachers do not do something, but then in the purpose it states that we will investigate how they do it. Well, if they don't do it, we can't figure out how they do it. It also shows the contradiction between the problem and the research question. The problem again is that teachers are not doing it, but the research question asks how they're doing it. So what we would, this is why we highlighted it in green. And in this case, for example, for the research question 1, I would add a comment saying, well, you can't have yes, no questions as a research question. And then I would suggest how to word this research question properly once it is aligned to the problem statement. What is also immediately visible here are the potential red flag issues that are listed on the IRB website. In this particular case, our students want to interview novice teachers about something that they're not doing, or that at least they're not doing very well. And which teacher would be willing to have such a candid conversation, and which principal would allow for our doctoral students to come into their school and conduct these interviews, where essentially you want to show that the teachers are not doing their job. So again, there are plenty of issues like that that we face, and especially in education, but I assume in other programs as well. And so in a comment, I would add the link to the IRB office hours, because these are the experts that need to talk to the student right away. The website from IRB also has a document addressing potential red flag issues. So I encourage you to review them. And if you see them in your student's design alignment tool or prospectus, please send that information to the student and send them to IRB directly. The design alignment tool can help students to narrow down their dissertation. In our example, it can be pointed out to the student that the research question have very different variables. At some point, the student in research question 2 is looking at factors that might have something to do with student-centered teaching. However, the problem and the purpose do not align with that research question at all. And at some point, the student is discussing professional development and educational programs. Again, this has nothing to do with the purpose and the problem statement. And so this is an easy way to show the student what does not align, and it opens up for a candid conversation about what a dissertation student or a novice researcher should be doing as part of their dissertation. I mean, research question 2 are certainly interesting questions, but maybe that is something that needs to be postponed until after graduation. So it really does help the student to focus what they want to do, to concentrate on the key components of their study. And again, I highly recommend to print the design alignment tool once it is written in stone, and it will help the student when writing to not divert too much from the topic at hand. So, and with that, I would like to forward the conversation to my colleague, Pat.
Yes, thanks. So as we think about this, you know, Laura and Beate have talked about the need for a problem statement to truly reflect what the problem is. and then the need to align that problem with the purpose, research questions, and everything else. And the way that the DAT can be used, the design alignment tool can be used to do that. So let me just kind of give you two different scenarios on how you can use this design alignment tool. So first of all, I want you to kind of think back on having a student's paper. It might be 40 pages long at this point. And say, as you're going through and you're reading this paper, you know, on page 3, the student is talking about, you know, this is the problem. On page 6, they kind of reword it differently. On page 8, they reword it a different way. So it's like every time you see that something kind of went a little off target there, you make a comment. So by the time they get this paper back, you might have 50, 80, 100 comment boxes in that paper. And so the student is a little discouraged when they open it. So one way to do this, and I know we're talking about Prospectus reviews because this is the best place to start, is at the beginning. But this tool can also be used at the proposal, at the final study stage. If you have somebody who is just truly struggling with writing their whole document in and coming up with a real purpose, a real problem statement and research questions that's gonna address those, this is a great time to pull out something like the DAT. So one way to go about this is to ask the student to fill out the DAT. So if you've been working with a student for a while now, and you've been already telling them that, you know, there's some alignment issues, you know, I'm seeing a couple of different problem statements in there, I don't know what it is, give them the DAT and say, every time you mention your problem, I want you to put it under the problem in the DAT. So if you go back to that first example that we gave, where on the screen it was the problem statement and we were able to identify 6 different problems, can you imagine then a student having to then copy and paste those 6 different problems into this DAT? And so they can quickly see, and so can you, and be able to say, so which of these 6 is your real problem? Sometimes that's easier to be able to, for them to digest when they're just looking at a table, as opposed to if they're looking at a long document that they poured their heart over and they're not really comprehending the fact you keep telling them that the wording has changed. But if they're able to copy and paste the wording themselves and put this into this table, they will start to see, oh, wait a minute, I have more than one problem. Oh, I said the purpose was this, and then on page 20, I said the purpose was something different. And then they're able to just go through and look at the research questions and put that in there and just really fill out that design alignment tool themselves and start to have those aha moments of the things that you told them throughout your feedback to them. So that's one way to use it. Another way to use it would be for you as the reviewer to use it as a tool. And this becomes really important too as the documents get even longer. So you have someone who might have a 100-page document at this point, and you might be the second member or the URR, and you're looking at this and or even a chair at this point, but you're looking at this and you're thinking, okay, I'm seeing a whole lot of different pieces here that doesn't quite align. As you go through the document and you start to make your comments, you can copy and paste it into the DAT. And so not only are you giving them your comments on a 100-page paper like that, it might be 200 comments, who knows? But as you're giving them your feedback back to them, you're also giving them this tool, this one table. And you're saying, this is what I saw. And so I would say on page, I would copy and paste the problem statement and put in parentheses page 3. Then underneath that, I would copy and paste the next problem statement I saw and put in parentheses page 6. So they can go back to those page numbers and go, oh, I really did make those, change that wording and really change the study in itself. And so that's just kind of 2 great ways you can use it. You can use it for the student to go through and put that information in there, or you can use it for yourself as part of your review process to put that information in design alignment tool. And so one thing that we were asked during the live presentation is there a way that we can use this past the prospectus? Absolutely. You know, this is a tool that you can use at any point. Anytime you see that there's a misalignment, this is a great opportunity to pull out the design alignment tool, and either you or the student put that information in those different columns. And so everybody can see and make decisions on where this study is really heading. You'll, the design alignment tool, when you see our link, it's to the basic design alignment tool. But we've had, even our group right here that's doing this presentation, we are already piloting an expanded version of that tool. So it's okay to add to that tool, but this kind of gives you just that basic information that you need in order to make sure that that student is on track with that design alignment tool, and make sure everything is, you know, on track and aligned. But feel free to modify that tool. If you can go to the next slide, I want to give them the link to the tool. So on this slide here, we have a couple of links. So the first one is to research and quality. I mean, everything is there. So that's always a great link to start. And then we have the design alignment to the direct link to there. And when you go to that link, you're gonna see the tool, but underneath that, you're gonna see a link to the tutorial on how to use the tool. So I've given that tutorial out to my students as well. So if I'm asking them to fill out the design alignment tool, I'm giving them the link to the tool and to the tutorial so they'll know how to do it. But it's also great for faculty and, you know, anybody else who want to learn how to use that design alignment tool. And then Beate and Laura, they also mentioned there's some issues that might pop up when it comes to the IRB, because a lot of times you can kind of see that in a document when a student says that they are the principal of a school and they're gonna interview the teachers that work there. You know, that's a potential IRB issue. So instead of, you know, just kind of moving past there, you want to go ahead and let that student know they need to contact the IRB. And the IRB has student hours, so that student can go and get some information. And I always ask the student to give me confirmation that you've talked to the IRB as part of this review process. So these are just some big, 3 of the main links that we wanted to give you that will take you back to that design alignment to all the resources that's available in research quality. And then of course the IRB, which is very important when it comes to student research. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to the presentation. And know that if you go to these links, there are some areas where if you have questions, they have some contact us places where you can contact and get more information, learn about the IRB hours, things like that. Just some great tools that will help you as you work with the students. Thank you.